The latest movie written and directed by Alex Garland is out this Thursday, April 11th, starring Kirsten Dunst, Wagner Moura, Kaylee Spaney, and Nick Offerman. Joseph and I watched an advanced screening in IMAX, and we have some thoughts.
And possibly some light spoilers, so beware.
Pretty light, nothing, no big plot points or anything like that. A lot of uncertainties around this movie, and I was really excited for it, and it beat just about all my expectations. What did you think about it, Joseph?
Seeing the trailer first, I'm like, this is election year, and a movie like this is coming out in April by Alex Garland, so you know it's going to be profound in some way, so have a little bit of a darker theme behind it, potentially. So going into it, I was more excited than I was, like, scared or anything. Initial thoughts coming right out of the theater, Civil War is Alex Garland's best movie.
I don't know if I can disagree with that, and I'm a very big Alex Garland fan. I like just about everything he's done.
I enjoy Ex Machina and Annihilation and unofficially Dread. I just rewatched it. Super fun movie, visually striking, and I enjoy Ex Machina and Annihilation, Men to a much lesser extent, but he's ventured out of sci-fi, the Civil War, and has stepped into more of a grounded action. I don't want to say an action movie, but
it's pretty action-packed.
Alex Garland, he knows how to build tension. In Civil War, he does it so well. Much like The Prestige, when Michael Caine's talking about, you can't just make something disappear. You have to bring it back. He knows how to build tension, and he knows how to cut that tension. Because the soundtrack was unexpected. When there's a big action sequence, he seems to end most of them with a out of left field song.
Yeah, like a needle drop that removes the tension.
Yeah, and I don't remember there being really a score. For the most part, I only remember the songs. If there was a score, it was definitely more of an underscore.
You know how in Annihilation it has that slow guitar picking? It reminds kind of a little bit of The Last of Us feeling.
Yeah.
It's that, and it's the same Jeff Barrows, I think.
But yeah, it's a very intense movie at times. Performances, for the most part, were really good. I would say that Kirsten Dunst probably the least good.
Really? You think so?
Yeah,
I thought she was great.
Her personality is a seasoned veteran photojournalist, so she has a stoicness to her face.
Yeah, like a detachedness to her whole character.
And she's experienced some things and seen some things. But I don't know, there were some moments where her line delivery just wasn't there for me.
Interesting.
But everybody else was good. Kaylee Spaney, her character is supposed to be in her 20s, but she looks like she's about 16 in this movie. She was really good. I felt like she was probably the standout. I feel like she had more to work with because her character is an aspiring photojournalist who wants to be a war photographer. By the end of it, I was on a movie high, definitely.
Yeah.
It was kind of intense scene after intense scene, ultimately leading up to a very intense sequence. We're following characters who are of the press, which in reality, they have an interesting position in war zones. They're following combat and they're in these very dangerous situations, but they're not being targeted. They're just journaling these events.
Did you feel like their absolute embeddedness, like they were hip to hip with these soldiers on the front lines? Do you think that was a little unrealistic because they were literally being pulled into battle with these people?
I don't really know much about war photographers or what the protocol is for that kind of stuff. I know that attacking the press in general,
it's like a war crime or something.
Yeah, you're not supposed to do that. On either side, you're not supposed to do that.
Don't do that. Don't attack the press.
Which is a really interesting thing that I feel like people will agree on. I mean, I don't know much about when it comes to the press, but I know when they do get attacked, it's like, hey, you can't do that. It's like attacking the ref in a sports game.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I think part of the Geneva Convention or some sort of, agreement that the world has made, this, world superpowers with each other, is that we're going to play all out, but there are things that are no-fly zones, like mustard gas, torturing. The press has to be this neutral ground so that it enforces those rules. Yeah, if one of the sides is not adhering to those rules, it's like, hey, I got a camera right here, and the world's going to know, and you're going to be vilified, and you're going to be held accountable.
Yeah, it was a good story because I didn't know that these are the characters and these are their occupations, and they're just documenting the Civil War in North America. I enjoyed that perspective in this sort of fictional scenario.
Annihilation, one of my favorite modern sci-fi movies. Dread, one of my favorite action shoot 'em up sci-fi movies. And Ex Machina is just a very beautiful look at this AI and its presence and what it means for singularity and all that sort of stuff. Even Alex Garland's ascent into television with Devs doesn't always work, but the ideas there are so broad and so interesting. which is kind of what surprised me about Civil War, is that there is no like big message behind it all. Here's the world. You as the viewer, you figure out where you lie on it, because one of my biggest fears about the movie was that it would be almost like divided, the left versus the right, of who's going to watch this and think that this is about them in a bad way, you know? And I think some people are going to take that as almost like a cop-out or the easy way out. You want to sell more tickets, don't make obviously the bad guys or this side of this political spectrum, make it kind of ambiguous. I liked that because it allows you to focus on the atrocities of war and really what war looks like when it is brought to the home front. It's easily Garland's biggest movie.
Yeah.
It feels bigger than anything. I mean, I couldn't even tell you the amount of assault vehicles being used, the amount of ammunition rounds that are expelled during the production. But I think the star of the show really is the immersive nature of how it's shot and the idea that you're attached to these photojournalists. So you don't necessarily have to follow any heroes or villains on either side. You're just there to observe and be like, I can't believe this is happening in Baltimore and Charlottesville and New York City and Pittsburgh. One particular shot that it says a "Go Steelers" spray painted on the overpass, and it's got 2 corpses hanging from it that are hung. And that's just one single small shot, or burned out entire towns, or it should be like a booming metropolis, and it's either abandoned or wrecked, and people are just slowly trudging through life because the society that we are used to is now collapsed because of this civil war. And the real star of the show is the sound design. Because man, the gunshots you can feel them in your chest. The percussive nature of the explosions, it feels like a knockback of the actual sound wave, followed by the damage that follows it.
It reminded me a lot of the sound design of Dunkirk. The opening of Dunkirk, when I guess the main character is being shot at by the hidden Nazis. At least it reminded me of the theater experience of when I first saw it, Dunkirk, and that like kind of sharp punching feeling you get from those bullets. And in the first shootout of Civil War that they experienced, those shots were loud.
Our theater we saw it in was not a true IMAX. It was like a smaller scale IMAX, but the sound did sound really good. I saw Dune Part 2 in Dolby, and that was really an experience. Not quite as loud as that, but it goes from a very calm level to instantly you're thrown into the mix and their bolts are flying and you feel like you're in the muck.
I mean, a lot of that is the editing too, because all of a sudden you're being hard
cut
there. Hard cut to
the
action.
hardest cut. And the other thing I think that Alex Garland does a really good job of in his previous work is creating visuals that are kind of stunning, that you never thought you would see anything quite like that before. In Annihilation, there's the guts being cut open with the snake thing slithering around, and then there's that same guy later is kind of exploded into this like fungus growth on the wall. There's a number of scenes in this where, you know, Kaylee Spaney's character is in a pit of bodies and she's crawling through a never-ending sea of corpses.
Yeah. One thing there were some moments in the movie where it felt like the shots were framed in a way that a street photographer would frame a photo. I mean, obviously it's very intentional, but in the sense that like this could play as a photo as well.
Yeah. There's a number of times when the action is going and it's super loud, super intense, and one of the photographers snaps a photo and the music stops, it cuts to black and white, still it just shows the image that they captured there. And you're like, oh yeah, that's what a war photograph looks like. And I've seen photos that look similar to that. And then it immediately gets back into the insanity that's there. It's forcing you to see those pictures that you've known from the past or ones that you're going to see in the future and say, hey, remember that one scene? Yeah, that same thing is happening every time you look at a war photo.
Yeah.
One more thing that really stuck out to me about how at the beginning, there's a kind of an intense scene. You're introduced to the characters. They're all meeting each other. So we're kind of meeting them along the way. You get my favorite actor in the group, Wagner Moura, who played Pablo Escobar in Narcos.
Ah, yes.
Yes. He was also in Elite Squad. And I've never seen either one of those, but I looked him up after the fact and I was like, that guy's so charismatic. And with his facial hair, the way he has it, it kind of reminds me of like a Kirkland signature Pedro Pascal.
Yeah, I was like, he reminded me of Pedro Pascal and Oscar Isaac mixed.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not a slight at him at all, because damn, was he charismatic. When you're getting to know them, they're in a hotel with all the other journalists, and the music that's playing over the jukebox or whatever is kind of like a classic 50s, maybe 30s ragtime sort of music, or kind of like old school pop music from the 30s. And as soon as it started playing that, and you're seeing the low lights because there's no good electrical grid, in these war times. It really reminded me of a World War II era or even World War I era, reporters that are reporting back to the home front, and they're sitting in a watering hole in, some other random country, or even in Vietnam or Korea or something like that, where there's period correct music playing over the radio. Remember those movies that we watched back in the day that were about some war in some other faraway place? It's the same thing, but it's here. At some point, they get to Charlottesville, and there's a number of helicopter flyover shots. They're over some kind of marshlands or swamplands and kind of forested areas. This looks like half of the Vietnam movies I've seen, really leaning heavy into the classic 70s rock music, helicopter shots and whatnot. It's almost like Alex Garland is taking you through the generations of war film and saying, all that stuff could happen here. Be careful about it.
Going back to the vagueness of how the story presents the sides, there's not really any sides and what they represent.
You don't even get their mission statements.
Yeah, it's just like you have the Western forces, which are Texas and California. And then you have the president and his military, or the rest of the country, I suppose.
Looks like most of the country is kind of just like, well, if the federal government's doing it, I'm on board.
Yeah, California and Texas are not neighboring states, and then you have D.C. all the way over there. So it's like they're kind of surrounded themselves already. And then there's a like Jesse Plemons and his crew, which feels like a militia on their own. They didn't feel like soldiers; they felt like people who took soldiers' uniforms. Yeah. That whole scene, I mean, it was tense in the trailer. It's a lot more tense during the movie.
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of American are you? You don't know?
The story beats of the characters were probably my least favorite part of the thing. There could have been more risks taken in those, decisions. You're kind of like, oh, that person's going to die, and then that person's going to die, and we're going to be left with these core three. And then I have a really good, strong, sneaking suspicion who the last person is going to die near the end. And I was right.
Yeah. So I guess it could be a little bit predictable, but you enjoy the journey. And I think that Spaney, her character, being like an aspiring war photographer, a war journalist, she's very timid at first. She freezes up at one of the first encounters to take a photo. She gets a little bit more confident throughout the movie, and then she gets a little overly confident at some points, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, like what are you going on here? And that first encounter, what's his name? Joe?
Yeah.
He's like holding on to her and like pushing her out and pulling her back in, letting her do her photography and pulling her back in when it gets a little hairy.
They're like 3 feet from the fire.
I know, they're right behind those guys.
They're right behind the guys.
Yeah. It's surprising that when I came out of the movie, I was expecting to feel a lot of dread coming out of a movie like this. But honestly, his other movies fill me with more dread than this one.
Yeah.
I don't know if fun is the right word, but I had more fun watching this, even though it still was very tense and edge of my seat type content, I should say. Because this is not a horror movie, it's not a sci-fi, it's just a grounded in our reality and maybe not like our political climate. And even that, it didn't feel like it pulled too much from the current state of things.
Garland is British, so I just think maybe he just felt like that's not his place, I mean, he could have set the thing in England, but, he already did that with 28 Days Later, so.
True.
I guess let's give some grades on this. For me, A+. I don't want to say it's a perfect movie, but I am on a for sure movie high. I think it might drop down as time goes on, or possibly on a rewatch. Alex Garland traded a little bit of the deepness and the complexities and the uniqueness of the story from his other films for the absolute impactful filmmaking in this. It was like shock and awe, very literal sense. There was a number of times when my mouth was agape with the views that I was seeing. Yeah. And that final siege is an all-timer. There's a vision of some sort of attack helicopter moving through the streets of Washington, D.C., lighting shit up. That was amazing production design. All like the main 4 leads did a really good job. Nick Offerman is not in it as much as you might think. He could overstep that line to goofy very quickly, and it wasn't anywhere near that. So yeah, delightful movie. See it in theaters, see it in IMAX if you have the ability to. Really great.
I'm going to give this an A, really solid A. I think it might stay there, honestly. The defining factor for me for it being a really good movie is that I feel like I want to rewatch this. Like, I want to watch it again, as opposed to his other movies like Ex Machina or Annihilation, where those are really good movies, but the way that they make me feel don't really make me want to watch them again frequently.
Sure.
But this one I can see myself coming back to a little bit sooner, because I had a little bit more just of a good time watching it. So solid A, really, really good.
All right, so there you have it. Everybody go out and see Civil War in theaters now. As soon as it hits streaming, if you're not a theater person, rent it. This is a great Friday night watch, a Saturday night watch with friends. Turn the volume all the way up and just let yourself get soaked in. And try not to think about the politics of it, because I think this is more about the human aspect to the atrocities of war and not necessarily what each side stands for and who that would be in real life and who that would be in real life, because I think that takes a lot of the fun out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Class dismissed.
I gotta get out of here.
The bell doesn't dismiss you. I dismiss you.
You're free to go.
See you next week.
See you later.
See you later.
That's a wrap.
Great show.